Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I'm sharing 5 true and haunting stories from deep within the Appalachian Mountains, told by people who lived through real terror on cold, lonely November nights. These are the kind of experiences that don't fade and might leave you chilled long after this video ends. But before we begin, hit subscribe, leave a like, and tell me where you're listening from, because one of these stories might have passed just a few miles from your door. Thank you for being here. Now then, let's begin. My name is Luke. I was 30 years old when it happened. Just a quiet guy with no wife, no real friends, no digital footprint to speak of. Not a loner. Exactly. Just someone who felt more comfortable when no one was looking. I grew up with my grandfather on the outskirts of a small town in Kentucky, far enough from the world to know the difference between natural silence and the kind that hides something. He taught me how to live in the woods, read the wind, track deer prints, move without leaving a trace. He also taught me how to live among people. Keep your mouth shut, keep your eyes down, and don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. But what I'm about to tell you, I broke that rule. In November of that year, I got a job repairing solar panel systems for a private hunting property deep in the Appalachian region of West Virginia. The place was remote, thick with trees, and sat miles off any paved road. The job was going to take time, more than I expected. I figured it'd be staying there for at least a week, maybe longer. The man who hired me was named Harold. Around 50, beard like a rusted wire brush, hands rough as barnwood. He picked me up from a gas station outside Hargrove and drove nearly an hour into the forest before we reached the property. He didn't talk much, but he wasn't rude. One of those old-school rural types, the kind that trusted the land he lived on and the gun he carried. No service out here. No Wi-Fi. Rain comes. The roads vanish into mud, he said. Stick to your work. That shed over there's off limits. Hiati, with a cry stain. I stayed in a small hunting shack about 50 yards from the main storage building. It was basic. Oil lamp, a wood bed, camp stove. Each day I inspected the solar arrays, checked the regulator, fixed broken wires. Nothing seemed off, except maybe the air, thick and still, the kind of quiet you don't trust. The first 3 days, Harold was friendly enough. He brought fresh venison, grilled it over a cast iron grate, sprinkled it with pink salt and dried peppers. He asked me a few things, the kind of questions that come from someone who's lived alone too long and knows silence isn't always empty. You like being alone. Most folks who do lost someone first. And we have nexted bag 9. We have 10 set forward. I just smiled. Didn't explain. He didn't press. The third night, he invited me to hunt with him the next morning. I declined, said I had to check the charge controller by the shed. He nodded, but when I added, I might take a look at the outlet wiring in the main shed too. Not Tenry says. His tone shifted. Quiet, but firm. Nothing in there worth looking at. Full of stink. Animal hides. Let me handle it. There was no chalves. I started noticing things. Every time I got within 20 feet of that shed, Harold would show up. Didn't matter if he'd been out of sight for hours. Head appear. Casual-like, but watching. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. Working alone in deep woods. No conversation for days. Your mind plays tricks. I once thought an owl was a woman screaming when I was camping solo at 26. But then I read an old article I'd downloaded before the trip about disappearances along the Appalachian Trail over the past decade. Hikers, seasonal workers. No bodies, no clues, just gone. I kept thinking about the way Harold looked at me when I neared the shed. Or that afternoon, I saw him gutting a doe. I only caught a glimpse, but the metal table, the straps, the bolt cutters, they didn't look like tools for dressing animals. They looked like props from a torture scene. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe not. But from that point on, the bad feeling I'd been pushing down started to take shape. It had a smell, a sound, a weight. 3 nights in a row, I watched Harold leave around midnight, driving his ATV into the woods. He dragged a large plastic bin behind him. Once, he came back caked in mud and blood, but there was no animal in sight. I also noticed this. Whenever I so much as glanced at the shed, Harold was somewhere nearby, watching. One cold, rainy afternoon, Harold told me he had to leave the property for a few days to pick up his brother in the next county. "You stay. Finish your work. Just watch out for coyotes," he said. Then, more quietly, "Don't go poking into things you shouldn't." "8 bells." He held my gaze for a second longer than normal. Then, he got in his truck and disappeared down the dirt path. That evening, after a simple meal of venison strips and black coffee, I stepped outside for a walk, just to stretch my legs. But as I passed the shed, that familiar itch at the back of my neck flared up again. I thought, one quick look won't hurt. The shed wasn't locked. I opened the door and the smell hit me harder than before. Not just faint traces now. It was thick, iron-rich, like old blood soaked into wood. I flicked on my flashlight. In the beam, I saw cleavers, bolt cutters, skinning knives, a steel table with restraints, like the kind used to hold down big game. Dried blood streaked the floor, and circular gouges marred the table's surface. I walked slowly around the room, light grazing over rusted meat hooks and clumps of dried fur that didn't look quite right. The air felt colder here, like it remembered what had happened. I told myself I was overreacting, just hunting tools. I turned to leave, and then I heard it. A faint scratch, then a soft clink. Metal on metal, somewhere in the dark. I turned the flashlight toward the sound. The beam landed on a large tool cabinet shoved tight against the wall. I dragged it aside, heart pounding. There, flush with the floor. A hatch. Iron handle. Padlocked. I grabbed a pry bar, broke the lock with 3 swings, pulled the hatch open. The air that rushed up was colder than the night. Rank, wet, laced with something foul and coppery. A dim red light flickered from below, like a dying bulb. Then I heard it. A breath, ragged, weak, someone trying to speak, and failing. I leaned in, staring into the dark, and I knew, whatever was down there, I couldn't walk away. I stepped down the narrow wooden stairs, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The dim red bulb overhead swung gently, casting shadows across the cracked concrete walls. The air was colder than above, sharp and damp, thick enough to taste. My breath came out in visible clouds. Halfway down, I almost tripped. Then my beam landed in the far corner, and I froze. 3 girls. They were huddled together on the floor, limbs bound in nylon rope, skin pale with bruises. One of them looked barely conscious, her face crusted with dried blood. The second girl stared at me, not afraid, but suspicious. The third slowly lifted a trembling finger to her lips. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, and my mind went blank. No plan, no gear, just a pocket knife and a dying flashlight. What was I supposed to do? Run, scream, call someone. Out here, in this pit beneath the woods, I was alone. My legs nearly gave out. My hand was slick with sweat. It took me several seconds to process what I was seeing. I looked at them, those hollow faces, those blank, waiting eyes. I wasn't even sure I could help. But I knew one thing. If I did nothing, I'd never forgive myself. I whispered, "I'm going to cut you loose. I'm here to help," and knelt down, pulling the knife from my pocket. They didn't resist, just stared, like they were waiting for me to vanish. I lifted the weakest one onto my back. She was so light, she felt like absence. They didn't cry, Didn't speak. They just followed, silent as ghosts. We left the shed into a wall of fog. I led them through a narrow deer trail I'd mapped earlier while checking the battery terminals. There was no way I'd take them by the road. If Harold came back, he'd use it. We stumbled for over an hour through underbrush and black trees. My arms were shaking. I heard every twig snap, every breath behind me. Then, up ahead, headlights. I ran toward them, waving frantically. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, and stepped out from a pickup. Hunters. They looked stunned, then helped us in without asking many questions. They drove us to a small outpost cabin. Electricity, heat, a landline. One girl was laid down and given water. I sat on the floor, hands still trembling. One of the hunters asked, "How'd you find them?" Then, as not reasoning, I just said, "I heard something." They seconded too. 2 hours later, a sheriff's vehicle arrived. 2 officers, plain uniform, local badges. One took notes, while the other looked more like a paramedic. Both asked calm, steady questions. That's when I realized the hunters had left. No names, no trace. One girl was taken away in an ambulance. The other 2 sat wrapped in blankets. I was told to ride along to the station for a full statement. But halfway down a dirt road, the driver said nothing. The officer beside him watched me through the mirror. My spine prickled. Then headlights flared, and another truck shot out of the trees. Our brakes screamed. The vehicle swerved, and we flipped. Glass shattered. My head hit the door. Darkness. I woke up on a hardwood floor. Tin ceiling. Old fan turning slow. I was alone. Eventually, the door creaked open. A man stepped in. Not a cop. No badge. Just boots, a cap, and a bottle of water he set beside me. He sat down across from me. "You got lucky," he said, voice dry and low. "Roads like that eat vehicles all the time." "Anyway, you meant well. But if you talk about that basement again, they won." He leaned closer. "No one's gonna come looking next time." They zapper. They dropped me off at a bus station 2 counties away. No ID. No phone. No records. When I tried to locate that cabin again, it didn't exist. No police report. No accident. As for the girls, no names. No photos. No hospitals confirmed taking them. Like they were never there. That was 15 years ago. I've changed names. States. I don't stay anywhere longer than 6 months. I've sent anonymous tips, emails, evidence, no replies, no cases opened. But every night I close my eyes. I see that red light, smell that blood, hear the breath of someone who barely had strength to keep going. And I keep asking myself, did they get out? Or was I the only one who ever made it out, just to carry what they couldn't? My name is Mara. I am 28, and I grew up in a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. A few years back, my Uncle Dan, a quiet man in his mid-60s who always wore the same worn leather jacket, asked if I could help him check on his old cabin deep in the woods. It was only about 3 miles from the nearest road, but it felt like a completely different world. We planned to stay for just a weekend. No big deal. I needed a break from city noise anyway. It was November when we went. The skies were gray, the air damp, and the kind of cold that sinks straight into your bones. The cabin was surrounded by towering pines and narrow deer trails. Mornings came wrapped in mist, and the air smelled clean and earthy in a way you only find far from pavement. When I first arrived, I thought this could be peace. We hauled in gear, got the old generator running, and for a little while, I let myself enjoy it. But on the very first night, I heard something. Not loud, just a soft thump, like someone tapping the side of the cabin. When I stepped outside with a flashlight, I saw nothing but a few low branches swaying. I told myself it was the wind. Still, I checked the locks before bed. The days passed quietly. I would boil coffee over the fire pit while Dan worked on patching the roof. I told him about a memory from childhood, climbing a pine tree so high I could see beyond the ridge. He just nodded, like always. It felt good to be unplugged. One afternoon, I wandered down to the stream that cut through the woods. The water was low and cold, reflecting the silver sky. On the opposite bank, half buried in the mud, was a small metal thermos, rusted, dented, with initials scratched into the lid. I picked it up, and it rattled like something was inside. When I showed it to Dan, he frowned and said, "Could have been here for years." But when I went back the next morning, it was gone. That night, I woke to a faint whistle outside. 3 notes. Slow, almost melodic. Dan said it was probably the wind through the trees, but it did not sound like wind. When I checked my bag later, my flashlight was missing. I found it hours later sitting upright on the porch railing, pointing toward the woods. On the 3rd morning, I opened the old fridge to grab a can of peaches and noticed a small metal box wedged in the back. It had not been there before. Its latch was broken, like someone had forced it. I asked Dan if it was his. He shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing. I felt a quiet dread bloom in my chest. That afternoon, Dan went outside to fix a loose section of the roof. I stayed inside, sitting cross-legged on the old wooden floor, reading by candlelight. The flame wavered in the draft, throwing long shadows across the walls. Then, without warning, everything went dark. Not just the lights. The whole cabin seemed to fall silent, like the air itself was holding its breath. I looked up. The candle flickered once, then went out completely. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my heartbeat. Then I heard it, soft footsteps above me, slow and deliberate, moving across the upstairs floorboards. My throat went dry. I grabbed the flashlight beside me and switched it on, but it did not work. "Dan," I called out. No answer. I stood there, listening. The steps stopped. The silence felt thick and suffocating. I took one cautious step toward the stairs. "Is someone up there?" Still nothing. The boards above creaked once more. Then all was still again. When Dan came back inside, I told him what happened. He frowned but did not say much. Just checked the generator again. He said maybe it tripped a breaker. But I could tell. He did not quite believe it was just the power. Later that evening, while I sat near the same candle, the power cut out again. This time, I heard the footsteps even clearer, right before something thumped against the upstairs wall. My breath caught. I grabbed the flashlight and climbed the stairs slowly. One door stood slightly open. Inside, a wooden chair faced the window, angled as if someone had just been sitting there, but no one was in the room. Around dawn, I woke to a grinding sound from the woodshed outside. It was heavy, sharp, metal scraping wood. I ran out with the flashlight and found the small metal box tossed onto the ground beneath a cedar tree, its contents missing. The soft earth nearby was torn up, and a single boot print with deep tread and heavy sole was pressed into the soil. It was not ours. I turned toward the woodshed and froze. A figure stood inside, back turned, motionless. Their shoulders were hunched, their shirt streaked with something dark. My light flickered once, then steadied. The figure turned, just enough for me to catch a glint of an eye. I ran, heart slamming in my chest, slammed the door, and bolted it. Someone pounded on the wall seconds later. Once, twice, then silence. Dan was pale when I told him. He tried the phone. No signal. We waited, frozen, until morning. When the sun rose, we checked the shed again. Nothing but old tools and splintered wood. No footprints. No figure. Just the box lying open in the dirt. We debated leaving, but the creek had flooded, and Dan's truck was half sunk in the mud from a failed attempt to cross. One more night, we told ourselves. Just one. That evening, we saw movement, flickers of something pale passing between the trees. I stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. The moment the beam caught a shape, it was gone. Dan stood beside me, silent. We went inside. We did not sleep. The hours crawled. Every creak of the wood floor made my skin prickle. Once, we heard something drag across the porch, slow and deliberate. The light on the front step flickered twice and died. I thought I saw a figure kneeling by the doorframe, but when I blinked, it was gone. We sat at the kitchen table, whispering plans about how to reach the road and how to defend ourselves if we had to. Sometime after 2 a.m, glass shattered in the main room. I ran out and saw a hand pulling away from the broken window pane. A figure climbed through, tall, wrapped in dark clothing, face covered with a workman's mask. I screamed, and Dan rushed in from the hallway. The intruder lunged, knocking Dan into the wall. They struggled, crashing into the table. I grabbed the nearest thing, a metal pan, and swung. It connected with a solid crack against his arm. He grunted in pain but did not stop. The intruder shoved me aside and raised a knife. Dan tackled him from behind, both of them hitting the floor hard. There was a blur of motion, a grunt, the sound of boots scraping wood, and then the knife clattered away. Dan cried out, his shoulder slashed open, blood spreading dark across his sleeve. I kicked the weapon toward the hearth, but the man twisted free and struck me in the ribs with his elbow. Pain shot through me like lightning. For a split second, he hesitated, clutching his injured arm where I had hit him. Blood darkened his sleeve, dripping onto the floorboards. His breathing grew ragged. Then, as if realizing he would not win, he dropped a heavy canvas bag onto the floor, turned, and stumbled back through the broken window into the woods, leaving a faint smear of blood on the sill. Inside the bag was another box, identical to the one from the fridge, its latch twisted open. Inside, we found black and white film negatives and a folded note scrawled in faded ink that read, "I waited. End of 7. Dan's shoulder wound was not deep, but it bled badly. I wrapped it with a torn bedsheet while he called a friend in town using a satellite phone we kept for emergencies. By the time authorities came, the rain had washed away nearly everything. The tracks, the blood, the boot prints. We packed up and left the cabin behind. A week later, Dan received a photo in the mail. A picture of the cabin taken at night. Porch light on. No note. No return address. Dan's wound healed, though it left a thin scar across the back of his shoulder. He jokes about it now, but sometimes, when the weather turns cold, he says it aches. As for me, I still have a faint mark along my ribs, a reminder of how close that night came to ending differently. I live in the city now, and I do not sleep near windows anymore. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, I think about that weekend, about the soft thump on the wall, the open fridge, the broken glass, and the blood on Dan's jacket that never washed out. And I wonder, was he living in the woods that whole time, watching us, or did he come back because of the box? I will never know. But if you ever find yourself in a cabin deep in the mountains, and you hear something outside, do not assume it is the wind. Before we step into the next story, if you're still here, still listening, with the lights low, maybe drop a comment. Just tell me where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. All right, let's keep going. My name is Eli, 32 years old, living alone on the edge of Clay County, Kentucky, where if you scream at night, no one hears you but the forest creatures and yourself. I served in the military for 6 years, then came home when my father started to fade. He passed away last summer, leaving behind an old log cabin and a shed full of things no one used anymore. After the funeral, everyone quietly drifted away, I stayed. With Bramble. Bramble was a Belgian Malinois I adopted from the local search and rescue team. He used to be a service dog, incredibly smart, and always slept near the door at night. The way he growled when something felt off always made me feel safe. In late November that year, a friend of mine who worked as a ranger asked me to scout an old trail in the southern limestone forests of Daniel Boone. They were planning to reopen it to hikers the following spring. I figured, why not? Ever since I was a kid, I had been used to the woods, hunting trips with my dad, camping with my uncle, even in the military. We were stationed near forests for the first few years. Nights out there never felt foreign. It was cold, quiet, and isolated, but not frightening. I was not young anymore, but the trail was close enough to home, and it gave me something to do. Better than sitting inside watching a cup of coffee go cold every morning. We set off on a Monday. The sky was overcast, cold but dry. The forest floor was damp, thick with dead leaves and roots twisted like hidden traps. I brought a tent, dried food, in a small stove, knife, lights, and a paper map. Bramble had his own dog pack with water and kibble. The first 2 days went smoothly. We covered nearly 8 miles, past a dry creek running through a narrow gorge and several small caves carved into the cliffs. During the day, sunlight filtered through thinning leaves in a green haze, dreamlike. At night, Bramble curled up tight outside the tent while I read a few pages of notes by lamplight. That second evening, as the wind died down, something strange happened. Every time I tried to light the fire, it sputtered out. No breeze, no moisture, just dead air. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. Even Bramble refused to lie down. He kept staring into the tree line, a deep growl rolling in his chest. When the forest goes quiet like that, it is not peace. It is warning. By the third night, I should have listened to it. I was asleep when Bramble let out a low growl. Not a bark, but a deep, trembling sound that meant something was close, something he could not place. I shot up, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it outside. That was when I saw him. A man stood about 30 meters from our tent. Still, not moving, just standing between 2 trees as if he had been there long before we arrived. I shouted, "Who's there?" No reply. I aimed the flashlight toward his face, but all I saw was a dark hood. Then he stepped backward into the shadows. He did not run or turn, just receded into the dark as if melting into it. I kept my hand on the knife and waited until dawn. In the morning, I checked the area. No broken branches. No sign of movement except for one thing. Footprints. A perfect ring of them surrounded the tent. Evenly spaced. Bare feet. Shallow but clear. And every few steps, there was a faint smear through the dirt, like whoever made them had dragged something behind. Inside that circle, there were no paw prints from Bramble. It was as if something had kept him from crossing that invisible line. I did not know how he had done it, but I knew this much: he wanted me to see it. I considered turning back, but the map showed I was only a day from the old ranger station my friend had mentioned. I decided to go there, rest for a night, then take a different path home. I was wrong. We left camp early. The sky was pale gray, mist hugging the ground like smoke. I did not say anything to Bramble, but he knew. The way I wore my knife outside the jacket, the way I kept glancing back. He stayed close, ears forward, scanning everything. The trail started to fade. Some parts were washed out, others tangled with roots like claws. I had to lift Bramble over a narrow rock gap and climb after him, my fingers stiff with cold. Around midday, as we passed through a stand of young pines, I noticed a thin length of paracord strung between 2 trees at knee height. Old, frayed, but tight enough to trip someone. I cut it carefully and moved on. There was no doubt now. Someone was out here, maybe living nearby, maybe guarding something. A sound behind us made me spin. Bramble froze. growling low. A twig had snapped, the kind of sound that does not happen by accident. I shouted, "Who's there? I have a dog, a knife. I don't want trouble." No answer. We backed toward a low ridge for cover. My heart was hammering, but my mind stayed sharp. I had faced danger before, but this was not a battlefield. This was someone else's territory. Whoever they were, they did not want me here. We looped down toward the dry creek bed, heading for the ranger station, maybe half a mile away. My mental map pulled me forward. Then the footsteps came, closer now. 2 people. I could tell by the uneven rhythm, trying to stay quiet but not enough. And then something else drifted through the trees. A voice, humming low, like someone blowing air through their teeth. Not words, just a rhythm. Bramble's ears shot up. The sound came from above us. From the ridge, I gripped the knife tighter. If we could reach the station, we could bar the door. Maybe use the old radio. When the roof finally appeared through the trees, they showed themselves. 2 men, one short and broad-shouldered, the other tall and thin, holding a machete. No backpacks, no hiking gear, just filthy clothes soaked with sweat and grime. "We don't want trouble," I said, holding the knife between us. "Just passing through." The short one rasped, "Wrong way. Friend, this trail's not open." I stepped back toward the porch. Bramble growled, fur bristling. Then the tall one lunged. Too fast. I blocked the first swing but slipped and fell. Bramble leapt at him, teeth sinking into his wrist. The machete clattered to the ground. The other man grabbed my jacket and tried to wrestle me down. I kicked free and scrambled to my feet just as Bramble was thrown aside, blood darkening the fur along his ribs. But he stood. "Back off," I shouted, blade ready. They hesitated. I scooped Bramble up and dashed inside the station, jamming the door shut with a rotting beam. Inside, it was cold and moldy. I laid Bramble on the cracked tile floor. His breath came heavy and fast. The wound was deep, blood soaking through his coat. I tore a strip from my shirt and pressed down hard. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage and helplessness. Then I saw movement. A hand slid through a gap in the door frame. Thin, pale, bones knotted under skin. It had to be the tall one. Without thinking, I grabbed the flashlight and brought it down hard. A sharp crack. Bone breaking. The hand jerked back. I backed away, pressed against the wall. Chest heaving. Outside, a low groan echoed, then stopped. No pounding, no scratching, only silence, heavy as stone. I sat beside Bramble, still pressing down on the wound. I whispered, "You did good. It's okay. It's okay now." But I knew it wasn't. Nearly an hour later, his breathing slowed. He looked at me once more, then closed his eyes. When the Rangers arrived, alerted by the faint signal from the old radio, I could barely speak. I only remember holding Bramble, shirt bloodied, and the station empty. No sign of the men. No prints. No gear, like they had never been there. But I remember their faces, the smell of their sweat-soaked clothes, the hum in the trees. A week later, I buried Bramble behind my cabin, under the oak where my father once hung a swing for me. I have not hiked alone since, haven't accepted any more scouting jobs. But when the wind howls through the trees, when I wake from dreams of Bramble running back from the dark woods, I remember he chose to protect me instead of fleeing. He knew I had to make it out, even if he couldn't. And sometimes, when the wind blows from the south, I still hear it. A whistle. Low. Short. The same sound I used to call him back to me. Only now, I never whistle back. My name is Royce, 35 years old. No wife, no kids, nothing to my name, but an old pickup truck and a few heavy tools that rattle in the back whenever I hit a bump. I met Leon at a junkyard on the edge of town. He was doing temp work, and I had just quit a construction site after a fight with a foreman who thought yelling made him a leader. Neither of us had a plan. We took whatever jobs paid cash by the end of the week. Clearing sheds, replacing roofing, hauling scrap. Last autumn, a man from Greene County put out word he needed 2 laborers to clean up a piece of property he had just bought. Said it used to be part of an old quarry, long abandoned, about 3 acres, littered with stone foundations and rusted junk. Pay was decent. He just wanted the brush cut and the debris cleared. 3 days of work, maybe 4. We set out early on a Tuesday morning. The first week of November, cold but not freezing. The kind of chill that seeps through your jacket if you stand still too long. The sky was heavy and gray, the air smelling faintly of rain. The truck rattled as we turned off the main road onto gravel. After half an hour, the signal bars on my phone dropped to nothing. The property sat in a narrow valley surrounded by low cliffs and mixed forest. It looked just like he had said. Jagged stone foundations, a collapsed shed with only its rusted frame left, and sheets of wire fencing tangled in vines. But one thing caught my eye. Near the edge of the woods was a mound of earth covered in moss. It was about the size of a car, buried halfway in the ground. A few stones had been stacked on top, and a thick metal plate, the size of a door, leaned against it, half sunk and rusted brown. It did not look like a grave, but it also did not look like anything natural, just something someone wanted covered. When the engine stopped, the quiet hit me. There were no birds, no insects, nothing but the faint drip of water echoing somewhere inside the cliffs. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. We set up our tent on one of the flat foundations and cooked noodles over a small fire. Leon told stories about working on a marijuana farm deep in the woods once, getting chased by cops, hiding in a drainage pipe for 3 days. I laughed and said he must be crazy to keep taking jobs this far out. The first night passed without issue, except for the cold that bit through 3 pairs of socks. But the next morning, something changed. The smell. It was not smoke, not rot, not wet leaves. It was the smell of burning plastic mixed with something sour and metallic, like pond water after a storm. When I breathed in, it left a taste of copper on my tongue, thick and wrong. Leon was already up tending the fire. I asked if he smelled it too. He shrugged, but when I walked toward the mossy mound, the odor got stronger. I called him over. Together we pried at the metal sheet. It was heavier than it looked, like something was pulling it down from underneath. After a few tries, we managed to lift one edge. Beneath it was darkness. Cold air rolled out, colder than the morning air. No smell of decay, no movement, just that burnt chemical scent rising like breath from below. Leon shone his flashlight inside. The beam slid across damp stone and vanished into black. We could not see the bottom. Probably an old storage pit. I said, maybe where they kept tools or stone blocks. Think Papergain, they will so play. Leon seemed interested, but I told him to leave it and get back to work. We pulled the metal back over and weighted it with stones. By late afternoon, while I was stacking scrap near the collapsed shed, I heard something behind me. A soft glide, like leaves shifting. When I turned, there was nothing. Maybe a raccoon, maybe not. That night, I woke to a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought Leon was moving around outside, but it was too steady. The taps came in slow intervals, like fingernails against wood. I held my breath, listening. The sound stopped. No footsteps. No wind. Leon was still snoring across the tent. I did not sleep again. In the morning, I checked the area. The dirt around the mound had been disturbed. The stones were shifted. Fresh footprints circled it, but they were not mine. And they were not Leon's. The metal plate had lifted an inch at one corner. Something had pushed from underneath. We said nothing about it, worked in silence. The air still smelled faintly of burnt plastic, but I forced myself to ignore it. That night, we turned in early. Sometime after 2, I woke to a sound that cut through the dark like a shovel dragged through wet soil. Heavy, slow. I reached for my flashlight. Leon's sleeping bag was empty. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. Mist clung low to the ground. I whispered his name once, then again louder. No answer. When I unzipped the tent, my light swept across the clearing and landed on him. Leon was standing by the mound, motionless, staring down at the metal sheet. The beam of my flashlight caught the side of his face, pale and wet with sweat. I called again, but he did not move. When I touched his shoulder, he flinched and turned. His pupils were blown wide, his breathing ragged. I heard something, he whispered. It said my name. From down there, it's again a knot, Rand. My stomach knotted. I pulled him back. We are leaving at sunrise. Do not go near it again. Understand? Is an intaction. He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the mound. We sat in the truck until dawn, the cab cold and fogged with our breath. When the first light came, I went back to check. The metal plate had been pushed aside. The opening gaped wider than before. The soil around it was soft, wet, and freshly turned, as if something had crawled out. We packed quickly. The smell was stronger now, sharper, like burnt wires and blood. Leon was quiet, face drained of color. I told him to start loading tools while I finished the last pile of scrap near the shed. When I came back, he was gone. I ran across the clearing, shouting his name. The sound bounced off the cliffs and came back hollow. No reply. At the mound, the metal sheet was completely flipped. The hole below yawned wide, its breath colder than air. Leon, I shouted. Nothing. Then a faint sound rose from inside, something scraping softly against stone. I pointed my flashlight into the pit. The light disappeared after a few meters. Then a hand emerged from the dark, gripping the edge of the rock. I stumbled back. A man pulled himself up, wearing Leon's clothes, but his body was stiff, his face slick with mud and something darker. His eyes had turned white. The pupils washed away. When he exhaled, it came out as a slow rasp, mixed with tiny popping noises like metal bending under strain. I grabbed a shovel from the ground. When he lunged, I swung. The blade cracked against his shoulder, then again across his face. The first blow knocked him down, but he rose again, arms reaching blindly. A black fluid leaked from his eyes and mouth, thick and glistening. I kicked hard, sending him backward. He fell into the pit, hitting the stone wall on the way down, then vanished into silence. I dragged the metal sheet back over the hole, piling rocks until my arms shook. By the time I finished, the sky was turning silver and the valley was thick with fog. I left everything behind. I drove until the forest thinned and the road straightened. My hands were bleeding. Mud streaked the floorboards. I did not know if it was mine or his. I never called the police. I told myself no one would believe me anyway. 2 days later, rain poured over Greene County. I saw a short piece on the news, a worker missing, last seen near an old quarry site. They said the ground had collapsed, sealing what appeared to be an old mine shaft. I turned off the TV and stood in the silence of my living room. The wind outside hissed against the window panes. Somewhere beneath the floor, faint but distinct, I heard it. 3 soft taps. Then nothing. The exact same rhythm I had heard that first night in the tent. My name is Harris, 36 years old. I work freelance real estate, the kind where you drive deep into the woods to photograph cheap hunting cabins and convince city people they are buying peace and quiet. Most of the time, that quiet is all too real. Early November last year, I was assigned to inspect a cabin deep in Perry County, Pennsylvania. It used to be part of an old logging camp from the 70s, now long abandoned. A private owner had bought the land for cheap and wanted to see if the place could be flipped for hunting rentals. The cabin had no power lines, no running water, but it still had a gas heater and some furniture left behind. The owner texted, "Stay the night if you have to. There should be gas and some basic supplies inside." I had done this dozens of times before. Usually just dust, cold, maybe a raccoon or two. I left early Friday morning. The sky was a dull gray, heavy but not raining. The air had that sharp, metallic chill that always comes with November, when the trees are bare and the soil still holds the cold from the night before. Halfway there, the GPS lost signal. I switched to the printed directions from my email, turn left at the split oak struck by lightning, drive 3 more miles on dirt road, past 2 sharp bends, then look for the red stake. When I finally reached the property, dusk had already settled. The cabin sat small among skeletal trees, its wooden siding silvered with age, the metal roof streaked with rust. The windows were sealed with clear winter panels. On the porch, a broken chair leaned to one side, and above it hung a string of small solar bulbs shaped like water drops, spaced evenly like Christmas lights. None of them were lit. I found the key in a code box behind the gutter, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The air was still and cold, but not musty. Someone had left cans of soup on the shelf and a tea set arranged neatly on the kitchen table. I lit the gas heater and made a few notes about the condition of the place. The only sounds were the soft click of the heater cycling on and the occasional gust of wind slipping through the wood panels. After dinner, I stepped outside to take photos of the porch. The air smelled like damp pine. The string lights above me stayed dark, which was no surprise after a cloudy day, but I noticed something odd when I came back in. On the shelf near the window sat a ceramic cup, upside down. Inside it, a faint ring of moisture glistened under my flashlight, as if someone had washed it not long ago. I told myself, maybe condensation. Still, the thought lingered. By 9, I was ready to sleep. The main room had 2 armchairs facing the heater and a small couch. I decided to stay there instead of the bedroom, close to the warmth. I set my phone on the table, recording with night vision on. A habit. Sometimes I reviewed footage for rodent noises. I lay down listening to the wind hum through the chimney. At some point, I drifted off. Sometime near midnight, a faint creak woke me, the sound of a hinge moving slow, like a door easing open. I sat up and turned on my flashlight. The front door was closed, the back door still locked. Nothing seemed disturbed. I checked my phone. The recording had stopped. A black screen with an error. Cannot continue recording. System failure. It's sking. When I replayed what had been saved, I noticed a gap of exactly 2 minutes where the video had cut out. During that time, there were no visible movements, but the chair near the heater had shifted a few inches sideways. And underneath the faint hum of the heater, I heard it. A breath. 3 slow exhales, close to the microphone, before the image came back. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. Maybe a glitch. Maybe not. I turned on every light I could find and sat upright, eyes fixed on the door. I must have stayed like that for hours. Near dawn, the darkness softened. I stood, hands trembling, and washed my face. The faucet groaned before the water came. I packed my bag, ready to leave as soon as the light strengthened. But outside, fog had swallowed the woods, thick, unmoving, the kind that makes sound disappear. I decided to stay another hour to finish my report, telling myself I had overreacted. Then, without warning, the power died. No pop, no spark, just a quiet click, and the heater fell silent. I switched on my flashlight, heart hammering. As I stepped toward the front door, I heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy, moving across the wet ground toward the porch. I turned off the light and crouched. Through the thin curtain, I saw him pass across the porch, a tall figure in an old hooded coat, walking slowly, almost lazily, like a man returning to his own home. I held my breath. He stopped at the door. The fabric of his hood shifted slightly, as if he were smelling the air. My hand found the metal flashlight on the counter. It was the only thing heavy enough to use as a weapon. A few seconds later, the door handle turned, testing the latch. Not hard, just enough to let me know he was there. Then silence again, until a faint creak came from behind me. The back window, where I had not locked the panel properly. I spun around just as a pale hand slipped through the gap, fingers curling inward. No voice, no words, just that slow movement. Instinct took over. I yelled and swung the flashlight down hard. There was a dry crack, and the hand vanished. I slammed the window shut and dragged a chair against it. Almost immediately, a dull thud hit the front door. Not frantic, but measured. Each hit spaced by a few seconds. Testing the hinges. I grabbed my pack, ran to the bedroom, and shoved open the window. Cold air poured in as I climbed through and hit the ground outside. I did not look back. I ran through the trees, stumbling, branches snapping underfoot. Behind me, something moved. Not running, but gliding. The sound of weight sliding across wet leaves. I ran until the trees thinned, until the dirt road appeared ahead. My hands shook as I unlocked the truck and jumped in. I drove without looking back. Potholes, mud. It did not matter. I only stopped when the road widened into the edge of town. At the gas station, I sat for a long time before checking my phone. The entire recording from that night was gone. Not corrupted, deleted, like it had never existed. I called the agency and reported the cabin unsafe. Mentioned possible structural damage. I said nothing about what had really happened. That evening, in my motel room, the lamp beside the bed flickered once, twice, then steadied. I unplugged it and sat there listening. Outside, a car passed, then quiet, and somewhere in that quiet, faint but real, I heard 3 slow breaths, the same rhythm as in the video. Later that night, when I went out to the truck for my bag, I saw it, a streak of dried mud running down the back window, shaped like the drag of a hand that had tried to hold on. I wiped it away, but the mark stayed. I have not gone back to that cabin, and sometimes, when the nights turn cold and the wind carries the same metallic taste as that November, I still wonder, if I had not woken up when I did, would the door have opened? And would I still be the one telling this story? Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I truly mean that. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. That way, you won't miss the next ones. And once again, thank you for walking this dark road with me tonight.